Okay, if we take all of these factors together, so what have we named? We've named word of mouth, people talking about it, bragging about how much money or how much more their house is worth. We've mentioned the fact that the banks are willing to extend the credit, and so this seems to reinforce people's beliefs. What else have we mentioned? We've mentioned friends and family, people that you know. Your sister bought a house, it's worth 20% more. She's an expert on the housing market now, right? Because she's actually sitting on it, because, you know, past results are a guarantee of future performance. We might also say the media. What about the media? Full of reports. We've seen, you know what the media looks like, right? Housing prices are up another 15%. So the media is also reinforcing this sense of robust conditions. What about real estate agents? What are the real estate agents saying in this kind of a market? Buy, 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 right? Unless you want to sell, which is a great time to sell. But how much trust do you think people put in the real estate agent as a sort of source of authority? The real estate agent would say, oh, it's a great place to buy. It's a great location.
They want the commission.
Of course they want the commission, but do you think, yes, I mean, it's a perverse incentive, but do you think people saw the real estate agent as a further source of comfort to reinforce their own view? They shouldn't, but do you think they did? Was anyone here a real estate agent? Did people believe you as a source of authority?
I don't really sell residential, we do commercial, but it's the same thing.
I mean, your incentive is still perverted, right?
Yes, so don't ever trust anything they say.
Right, okay, so there we go. We hear it from the real estate agent himself.
But on the contrary, the funny thing is that we're talking about psychology of the consumers. Even if you give them the truth, because some people I do care about, I tell them don't do it. They still do it. Yeah, you're doing just for someone else.
Well, yeah, I think the point is that the real estate agent can also be seen as an agent of authority in this market, even though the real estate agent is merely a facilitator of a transaction, right? It's a way of bringing buyers and sellers together in a market to make it a little bit more efficient. But then once the real estate agent becomes a source of authority, this is a great neighborhood, I have experience, I understand, I've been selling houses in this neighborhood for 30 years, and these prices are great, and there's all these reasons why, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When people are coming to interrogate their own decision making, they can point to the real estate agent and say, yeah, well, you know, I was talking to Jim and he told me 30 years he's been selling houses in this area. Literally, he told me yesterday this is the best time he's ever seen to buy, even though prices have doubled in the last 5 years, because it turns out they were persistently undervalued before. Yes, sir. And they'll come over here.
There's a large section of the market that's kind of, that we're not really talking about, which is people who are just living their lives. Like, so I live in Seattle and I just got a job in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I have to move there, and I owned my house before, so I need to own a house where I'm going. Or I'm 25 and I just got a good job, and I'm about to get married, so I'm going to buy a house. Now you could say they would look and they should have thought about it and maybe waited a few years, but how long is a few years?
But okay, that's a good point, because one of the things that we need to identify here is that timing matters. If you are intervening in this market, how likely is it that you're going to make that purchase if you expect prices to fall 20% within 12 months? Because you need a house. And I would argue the answer is very unlikely, right? You're buying it because you think it's a good time to buy. That's part of what is the investment logic here. Is that the timing of the purchase matters, because if you had expectations of substantial price decrease, you'd be willing to rent for 12, 24, 36 months in order to acquire the asset at what would be then perhaps a truer market value.
But then you could argue that people buying homes in 2003 were making a good rational decision because it didn't actually crash for another, 5 years?
5 years, you could, absolutely. But I don't think that people buying a house in 2002 were in a position to predict how truly irrational, quasi-criminal the market was going to become, that ended up actually providing an environment to support those prices going forward. But yeah, fair enough. I mean, one of the things you can say is, let's take perhaps a more stable example. Somebody who bought in, say, 1999, when housing prices were robust, and sold in 2003. They were still buying in a kind of a bubble condition, made a lot of money out of it. So that certainly, it's not as if everybody who buys in this market necessarily had adverse results. In fact, we know that they didn't. But the point being that the people who are buying in this house, when you ask them what do they expect, what do they think that market looks like, we see this very irrational reading of the market. I can lower my risk and raise my capital appreciation potential at the same time. And we know that that is not logical. If we take these sorts of information together, So we've put a few things up. We've said friends and family. We have, what else did we have? Media. Real estate agents. Banks. I think what we're seeing here is an example of what I call the information sphere. That is to say, and I borrow that idea of a sphere from the German philosopher Jürgen Habermas, who talks about the public sphere. But the idea that people we exist in a world of information, and we choose to populate that information sphere from various sources. And we choose to populate that information sphere from various sources. So our friends and family are giving us examples of, you should buy a house for this reason. Your sister bought a house, it went up 30%, etc. So we're getting this kind of anecdotal evidence. The media is full of reports about prices are up again, another 15% this quarter, another 10% over last year, etc. So we're getting all this confirmation from the media. Real estate agents are telling us that this is literally the best time ever to buy a house. They've never seen a better time. So they're giving us information about this. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, the banks are giving us the most critical piece of information at all, the mortgage. Right? Because surely one of the things that's operating here, and I think we said it before, one of the things that's operating here is that people are actually moving the kind of due diligence we would expect for something like this onto the side of the banks. The logic, and for those of you who bought a house, this will be familiar to you, they wouldn't give me the mortgage if it weren't safe. Because it's much more risk for them than me. Yes, it's $100,000 of my money, but they're giving me $400,000. They're not going to give me $400,000 unless the investment is safe. And that allows you then to exempt yourself from the kind of perhaps analysis you might otherwise do. Because you can relocate then the authority for your decision into the hands of somebody else. In this case, our friendly, neighborhood, trustworthy banker who's able to assess risk on your behalf and then move you into a nice house. Taken together, what we're seeing here is a classic example of confirmation bias. Taken together, what we're seeing here is a classic example of confirmation bias, are we not? I want to buy a house, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find, or I'm going to populate my information sphere with sources of information that basically reinforce what I want to do. And the most important of that is the banker, because the banker not only confirms your bias, but confirms your bias with the added luster of authority, prestige, and reputation. These guys are professionals. They know what they're doing. They wouldn't give me the mortgage unless it were safe. So now I feel confident to go out and buy an asset. And I think it's that element, that sort of protection, if you will, that comes from that reference to authority that helps our home buyers perceive their decision as rational. Essentially, they're putting the rationality of the market into the hands of somebody else. As we know, as the story unfolded, was that a reasonable thing to conclude? No, because the bankers, in fact, were not responsible agents here in this market. They were not extending credit to the market in a responsible way. But from the point of view of the home buyer, from the point of view of the market participant, him or herself, they didn't know that. And so the bank becomes a nice place to then to put your trust and your sense of security